Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. The topic for today's webinar is Solar and Energy Storage for Massachusetts Environmental Justice Communities, Benefits, Barriers, and Solutions. This webinar is being presented by Clean Energy Group, Vote Solar, and Applied Economics Clinic, and the Union of Concerned Scientists. It is part two, the second part in a two-part series. Part one took place last week. We've got a really great panel of speakers lined up for you today. And before I pass it over to them, I'd like to go over a few very quick webinar logistics. You are on mute. All of our attendees are on mute today. You're in listen-only mode. Hopefully you can hear and see us, though. We do want to hear from you, though. We hope that you will submit your questions and your comments into the Q&A panel in your webinar console. We're going to save about 15 minutes at the end of our webinar for questions. We'll get to as many as we can. You can turn on automated captions if you'd like to. We will, in just a few minutes, be putting a link to the speaker bios in the chat on the webinar console, so you can read those there. To answer our most frequently asked question, yes, this webinar will be recorded. We'll send you a link to the slides into the recording within about 48 hours, and we'll also post those materials on Clean Energy Group's website, cleanegroup.org/webinars. And finally, we encourage you to provide us with any feedback about today's webinar by filling out our post-webinar survey or reaching out to us by email. So with that, I'd like to now pass it over to my colleague, Todd Olinsky-Paul. Todd is a Senior Project Director at Clean Energy Group, and he will be kicking us off and introducing the rest of the panel.
Great. Thank you, Samantha, and welcome everybody to this webinar. This is the second in a series of two, and we'll give you a little bit more information about that later. But just to let you know, these are all being recorded. If you missed the first of the series, you're always able to go back and watch that. I'm going to briefly introduce the speakers and the topic, and we'll introduce our organizations, and then we'll get right into it. We are joined today by Paola Garcia from Union of Concerned Scientists and Elena Weissman from Vote Solar, and they, along with myself, will be presenting the information. And then we are also joined by Tanya Stasio, a senior researcher from Applied Economics Clinic. Applied Economics Clinic was contracted by our three organizations to do the research and write this report. And so she will be on hand after the presentation to answer any technical questions. If you could go into the next slide, please. So these are the reports. They came out earlier this month, so they're very fresh. We did a webinar last week on report part one on the left, electrification with equity, the opportunity for behind-the-meter solar and storage in Massachusetts, which addresses the statewide opportunity for distributed solar and energy storage that's behind the meter in residential and commercial facilities to essentially to reduce peak demand, which is projected to increase very sharply in the coming years due to electrification. And we'll have more on that in a minute. That was part one. Part two is today's webinar. And this one really focuses on the equity part of the equation. This one is covering report two, electrification with equity, scaling behind the meter solar plus storage in Massachusetts environmental justice communities. So we have already established the opportunity statewide. Now we're really focusing in on the equity opportunity and ways to overcome barriers that everyone knows exist and acknowledges need to be addressed in order to allow everybody access to these new clean energy technologies. Next slide, please. Briefly, I'd like to introduce you to Clean Energy Group. If you're not familiar, CEG is a not-for-profit. We are based in Vermont, but we work across the country with state energy agencies, also with community-based organizations, NGOs, national laboratories, U.S. Department of Energy, and other partners. We are broadly based advocacy organization for clean energy solutions. And in just to let you know, I specialize in energy storage and virtual power plants and state policy and program development. And that's what we are representing here today. Next slide, please. I'll pass this over to Paula to introduce herself and the Union of Concerned Scientists.
Thank you so much, Todd. So great to be here with you all today. I will share a little bit about the Union of Concerned Scientists. It's a Massachusetts-based national nonprofit that was created more than 50 years ago. Basically, what we do is that we put science into action to build a healthier planet, a safer world, and also a more equitable society. We work with thousands of supporters in Massachusetts and also with our 500,000 supporters across the country to advance equitable science-based solutions to some of the most pressing problems in the world, including around climate and energy. Specifically in terms of our work in Massachusetts, we have contributed to advance key pieces of legislation, including the state's net zero requirement, large offshore wind procurements, and most recently, key components of the new legislation on siting of clean energy infrastructure. And right now, one of our key priorities is around energy affordability, and part of what motivated this analysis, this report that we are sharing with you all today. Thank you.
This is me. I'm Elena Weissman. I'm here from Vote Solar. And Vote Solar is a national nonprofit organization that works at the state level in 26 different states to advance equitable clean energy policy. So we do that in the legislative capacity, which is my area. I cover the Northeast states on our legislative side, as well as in the regulatory sector. So our staff is split. We all work towards the same mission of realizing a 100% clean energy future. So we do that in working with regulatory commissions and other regulatory bodies, with state legislators, and with many partners and communities on this shared vision. So we've been really excited to work on parts 1 and part 2 of the report. It's nice to see so many familiar names here in attendance today, and we're excited to share the results and recommendations with you all.
Great. Thank you, both Paula and Elena. And I will go through these next few slides pretty briefly because they are essentially a review of what we did in the first webinar. If you attended that webinar, don't despair. This is very brief, and then we will get on to the new information. I just wanted to present this as a bit of background. I also want to just remind you to please type in questions as they occur to you. While the others are presenting, I will be sorting through those, and so we can address as many of the best and most pertinent and timely questions as we possibly can. Okay, so let's talk about electrification. This is kind of the idea that underlies both of these reports. If you look at states that have set decarbonization goals, clean energy goals, and the like, you'll find that electrification is key to meeting these goals. And this is true in Massachusetts and in many other states. And electrification simply means that you are electrifying sectors that are currently powered mostly by fossil fuels. And those tend to be sectors where there's in this case, we're talking about transportation and the building sector. So transportation, of course, we're seeing more EVs, but we're still seeing the vast majority of vehicles are gas and diesel. And then on the building side, of course, we are mostly talking about heating and cooling, and mostly heating, because the heating of homes and businesses is still Again, there are some all electric houses and so forth, but we still have a lot of systems that rely on natural gas, heating oil, and so propane and so forth. So in order to decarbonize, the heating and transportation sectors have to become electrified. And this is good because it makes things more efficient and reduces the amount of greenhouse gas emissions and other types of pollutants. However, it also creates a surge in demand for electricity because now you need electricity for all the things you used to need it for, plus you need it for heating buildings and running the transportation fleet. So, according to Massachusetts' own reports, electrification is supposed to more than double peak demand in the state by 2050. And that's a big increase. That means that there will be a lot more electricity that will have to be generated to meet that need. And the state, of course, would like to do this with clean energy. But the problem is one of timing and scale. So right now, a small portion of the electricity in Massachusetts is generated through wind and solar. If those clean energy sources don't scale up quickly enough, the default for the ISO New England and for the utilities is likely to be new gas generation. In other words, if we get to the point where peak demand is growing faster than clean new resources that can meet it, the default is likely to be fossil fuels. And so that's what we're trying to avoid. The other part of this is that if you scale clean energy, but you don't do it equitably, then you're leaving half of the state behind. And that also doesn't work. You have to bring everybody along and make this accessible to everybody. The solution we're proposing is that increased emphasis and reliance on behind the meter distributed solar and solar plus storage can be the solution. It can scale quickly to reduce peak demand. It can deliver equity, resilience, and human health benefits. And it really focuses investment on communities and not big corporations. And we think that the programs and policies in Massachusetts are already in place to achieve this. They just need to be expanded and upgraded and really made to scale quickly to meet the need. Next slide, please. So I'll pass this over to Elena for some context here and to talk about opportunities currently in the legislature and executive orders.
Thanks. Yeah, so this will also look familiar to anyone who was here for part one, but I'll just sort of go through some of these things again. And the big picture here is that we really, when we envisioned these reports and started working on them, I want to emphasize that we really did not intend for them to go and sit on a shelf somewhere. We do think that there are really ample ways for them to plug into ongoing processes happening in Massachusetts. So I will go through some key places where we think it can inform upcoming and ongoing decisions. So on the legislative side, we know the Massachusetts Senate is actively working on an energy bill, following on the House passing their energy bill, and the two versions will need to be reconciled later this year. So the recommendations and the data that we have in this report really does give senators some strong and independent evidence for why the provisions matter, why the strong DER provisions matter, and why the Senate should build on what the House did and, in fact, go even further. The governor also, back in March, signed the executive order number 654, and that directs the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity to do sort of exactly the kind of gap analysis that this report did. So that executive order, in addition to directing the office to study some of the things that we've done here in the report, we hope it can be helpful in that way. It also sets a number of really ambitious targets related to demand management and virtual power plants. And so we show in part one sort of the potential for that technology, and here in part two, why it's so significant in EJ communities, and we have recommendations on how to unlock it. And then, of course, there is a pretty bleak federal context with the cancellation of large offshore wind contracts and an expiration of the residential solar tax credit. So it's just generally a big void that we hope that the state can fill in. Then on the regulatory side, there's an ongoing docket to implement new smart regulations. And there's something significant that we outline in part one where the new smart regulations eliminate a storage adder. So we hope that the report can inform sort of future efforts on there. And then Mass CEC, another state agency, completed a grid services study back in the fall. So we hope that this report can help inform some of the next steps there, specifically as it relates to low-income and environmental justice participants in grid services. And we also think that for any agencies or other bodies that are working on the CECP, the Clean Energy and Climate Plan, this really is a sort of like how-to guide on the DER side. And like I mentioned earlier, a gap analysis of where we stand on our Clean Energy and Climate Plan provisions. And then, of course, many things in here do build on the 2023 Charging Forward report, which makes a sort of grid level big picture case for storage. And so we add the sort of specifics and the equity piece to some of those bigger findings.
Great. Thank you. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go over just a couple of initial findings. And again, this is will look familiar if you saw the first webinar, and then we're going to quickly go on to the equity-focused stuff. So this is just showing the projections from Massachusetts report Charging Forward that shows that peak load growth in Massachusetts is largely due to electrification. You can see on the bar on the right there, mostly due to space and water heating requirements for buildings. A little bit less, to a lesser degree, also transportation. And you can see that the overall peak load doubles between 2020 and 2050. And also during that time, the grid is expected to flip to winter peaking. So those peaks come in the winter instead of the summer now. Next slide, please. Smith, if you could go to the next slide. Thanks. This shows technical potential and some forecasted market potential and the current amount of behind-the-meter solar that is installed. So it's kind of interesting. So the two bars, very small bars on the left, are projections of how much behind-the-meter solar could be installed in Massachusetts by particular dates based on a market analysis. So the one on the left is NLR, which used to be known as NREL, the National Laboratory. And they're saying that by 2029, you could get a little over 1 gigawatt of solar behind the meter in Massachusetts, deployed in Massachusetts. The second bar is ISO New England's analysis, and they're saying by 2030, again, a market analysis is that you could get 2.8 gigawatts of behind-the-meter solar installed in Massachusetts. The third bar shows where we are currently, and it's interesting that we have already surpassed both of the 2029 and 2030 forecasts, and it's only 2026. We are currently a little over 3 gigawatts of installed behind-the-meter solar capacity in Massachusetts. Now compare that to the bar on the right, which shows you technical potential. This is showing what it could look like if the highly suitable rooftops and other surfaces behind meters in Massachusetts were fitted with solar. And this is showing that you could go from a little over 3 gigawatts up to 92 gigawatts of behind the meter solar in Massachusetts if you were to reach the technical potential. And we'll revisit that in a second. Next slide, please. So the takeaway here is that we are beating market forecasts, but we are barely scratching the surface of the technical potential. Now, if you look at the amount of energy storage that could be paired with that behind-the-meter solar, it depends on what the percentage or the ratio is of storage to solar, we've chosen to go with a sort of middle of the road average. So that is the middle bar here, the 0.4. And that's showing that with that 92 gigawatts of behind the meter solar, you could pair 40 gigawatts of behind the meter energy storage in the form of batteries. And that is more than enough to meet the 2050 projected peak demand. In fact, that's 165% of the 2050 projected peak demand in Massachusetts. And that means that behind the meter solar and storage could more than solve this problem. Next slide, please. Okay, I am now going to pass the mic over to Paula from UCS, and I will be back later with questions and discussion.
Thank you, Todd. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about the analysis that we conducted. So basically what we wanted to do was to estimate the technical potential of behind-the-meter solar and storage in environmental justice neighborhoods where people of color, low-income people, and limited English proficient speakers live. So what we did is that we mapped different layers, including housing conditions, extreme heat, and energy burden data. And then what we did in this report is that we offer insights into barriers and how to address those barriers through different solutions to be able to scale deployment of solar and storage in and for environmental justice communities. One key piece of this report is that we had an advisory committee. We developed this analysis in collaboration with that advisory committee that had representation, like that broad perspectives from different sectors, including environmental justice and indigenous peoples organizations, affordable housing, and clean energy developers. And basically what we wanted to do was that this analysis was to reflect on the ground experiences and priorities for EJ neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So in terms of the key findings, the first one is that EJ neighborhoods across the Commonwealth have an enormous behind the meter solar and storage potential. In terms of solar potential, we estimate that behind the meter solar in Massachusetts environmental justice neighborhoods potential is more than 31 gigawatts, which it's enough to power all of the state, almost 3 million homes. When paired with storage, that potential is 13 gigawatts for the behind the meter storage. And activating this resource is key to fulfill the state's decarbonization and affordability goals. So it was mentioned right before how the peak demand is expected to double by 2050, like around 24 gigawatts or more that will be needed to cover the peak demand. And the state is already reliant on fossil gas, also known as natural gas, which provides more than 65% of in-state net electricity generation. So heavily reliant on gas already. So as we are trying to cover increases in peak demand, making sure that that comes from clean sources is fundamental. And also when we're looking at environmental justice neighborhoods, it's also very important to keep in mind that more than 80% of the polluting power plants with their associated health risks are located in or within 1 mile from EJ neighborhoods. So definitely we need to make sure that peak demand increases to peak demand are covered with clean energy. Solar, behind the meter solar and storage have a key role to play, and addressing those increases in peak demand with this kind of resources can help with reducing the need for expensive transmission and distribution investments, and also help us all at large with reducing wholesale electricity prices. Next slide, please. So the other key piece as we're thinking on how to unlock this potential is that special attention needs to be given to the creation of programs, incentives that reach renters and condo owners and multifamily buildings, because only close to a third of that behind the meter solar and storage potential in environmental justice neighborhoods is located in single family homes. Again, pointing to the need to think about renters and multifamily buildings condo owners so that we effectively unlock that potential for everyone that live in environmental justice neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So the other thing that we did was one of the layers that we looked was the energy burden. The energy burden is basically the percentage of a household income that goes into paying for energy. In Massachusetts, the average is 3%, but when we look at low-income households, it rises to 10% and even goes as high as 31%. And when we were like doing that overlay of like the technical potential in environmental justice neighborhoods and higher than average energy burdens, what we identify is that more than 11 gigawatts of that potential paired with close to 5 gigawatts of storage potential overlaps with those households that are already paying a higher than average energy burden. And there are many studies that are showing us that access to rooftop solar for low-income adopters are helping with alleviating the amount of money that they have to pay for their electricity bills. So this only gives visibility to the value that behind the meter solar and storage can provide in alleviating energy costs for those that need them the most, especially now in the context of like the energy affordability crisis that we all know that we are going through. Next slide, please. And then, so the other component is that we look at extreme heat. And so what we identify is that behind the meter solar and storage have a key role to play in both advancing energy security and also supporting energy communities, energy resilience. So environmental justice communities are more likely to live in dense urban areas, in neighborhoods that lack green spaces, which expose these families to urban heat island effect. And the other thing that is also very important is that these neighborhoods also are more likely to be like the households are more likely to be inefficient in terms of heating and cooling, which makes that they have to use even more energy to cover those needs. So, and then there is like the high prices, the high electricity prices that are happening all over the country, and Massachusetts is not the exception. And many households are having to do very difficult decisions in terms of like keeping their homes at unsafe temperatures when there is a heat wave, when we are going through a cold snap, because it's like paying for electricity or paying for medicines and other things that are priorities for their household. So what we identify in this analysis is that more than 90% of that Massachusetts behind the meter solar and storage potential in EJ neighborhoods is within a hotspot area. So being able to unlock access to rooftop solar can significantly reduce energy bills for these households, helping them to keep their homes at safe temperatures. That's like the energy security component, but also can help with providing, if it's paired with energy storage, can help during grid disruptions, and also can help with the creation of resilience hubs in community buildings, in shelters, helping to bring cooling and other essential services during outages. And so the one last thing that I will share here is that we have the SMART program, which has been very effective in terms of facilitating the growth of solar But we, although we know the many benefits that access to rooftop solar and energy storage could bring, specifically for this SMART program, that data is showing us that only 1% of the program has been allocated to serve low-income properties. So we have a huge opportunity in front of us in terms of being able to unlock this potential. And I will transition to Elena. Thank you.
Thanks, Paula, for going through all of that. So the big question is why? Oh, can you go to the next slide, please, Samantha? Thank you. So the big question now is what is getting in our way of meeting that potential? Paula laid out why this is so important, and I'll go through what's in our way. So we lay out 9 barriers in the report, along with a number of recommendations for addressing them. So I grouped them sort of into 4 themes. I'll go through each one of them on the next few slides to point to the kind of solutions that actually work. So the first bucket is money and incentives. So this is the idea that the programs that we have don't have enough support, and what's there is not reaching the households and people who need it the most. The second is on the buildings and workforce side. These go together because a lot of older homes in Massachusetts need upgrades before they can go solar, and we don't have enough trained workers to do all the installations, especially in frontline communities. The third is access and ownership. So this is addressing what many call the split incentive problem. So renters and condo owners are largely locked out of many program offerings. And then even when people do want to and can participate, the programs can be really hard to navigate. And then the last is trust and outreach. So we've documented some widespread distrust of providers, both on the utility and developer side. There were also recycling concerns that came up, as well as the fact that over 100,000 households cannot get program information online. So each of these themes have specific recommendations, and I will walk through them if you could go to the next slide. So on this first theme, money and incentives, these recommendations are addressing that problem. We all know that solar is now the cheapest form of electricity, and Massachusetts for a really long time has been a leader on deploying distributed solar. But the upfront cost barriers can put it out of reach for a lot of families. And so the programs that we have really are not reaching the families who need the solar savings the most. And this statistic that we have in the brighter blue box on the bottom, I think says a lot. Just 0.1% of smart behind the meter units that came online between 2018 and 25 were on low income properties. And actually, even in that, only one of them was paired with storage. So this is a big problem in a state where nearly half of all neighborhoods are EJ communities. So we have 4 recommendations here on your screen to fix this. The recommendation number 1 is to establish equity participation targets. So right now there's not a binding obligation to reach environmental justice neighborhoods. So we definitely need to have a target there. We should have an equity target that spans all the different relevant clean energy programs, sort of a clean energy equity framework, which is actually something that Vote Solar has been working on with the coalition, including many folks who are here on this webinar, for a number of years. The second recommendation expands some of our existing and relevant programs, so SMART, the Clean Peak Standard, and Connected Solutions. So we recommend expanding those budgets with equity incentives because we need to have money that flows to those targets through carve-outs and through program expansions, not just a sort of like aspirational direction. And that ties into recommendation number 3, a budget carve-out. So making sure that funds are reserved for EJ neighborhoods. And then this 4th recommendation is to have a Solarized Mass Plus program. So a specific dedicated program that used to exist but does not anymore to support behind the meter solar and storage deployment, specifically in environmental justice neighborhoods. And that would be modeled on that existing Solarized Mass program, but specifically built for communities that need more support in order to participate. You can go to the next slide now. So the buildings and workforce theme, like I mentioned, these are connected because the homes that need the most clean energy upgrades can be the hardest to upgrade, and then we don't always have enough workers to do that. And there's also documentation in this report of a lot of difficulties in retaining workers who go through different training programs. So to start with the building side, as we note in this blue box, 46% of Massachusetts homes were built before 1960. So these are oftentimes households that need panel upgrades or other structural work done before they can support solar or storage on the site. And those upgrades can be really expensive. So we address that with recommendation number 5 to offer zero interest financing for behind the meter readiness, and then upgrades and grants for EJ households to get there. And then recommendation number 6 tries to get ahead of that problem for new construction. We recommend establishing a stretch code that incorporates behind the meter solar readiness and storage readiness, so that we're not building sort of another generation of households that are going to need more retrofits 20 years from now. And then on the workforce side, we saw actually the number of solar installers fall between 2022 and 2023. So we have a recommendation to assess workforce trends in the state and to expand existing training programs with specific ideas on follow-up and follow-through measures to make sure that people who are being trained are actually getting jobs and not just a sort of certificate without it leading to ongoing and sustained employment. Next slide, please. So this is the access and ownership bucket. We have a lot of recommendations here. And the sort of through line here is that many people can be structurally locked out of the programs that we have before they even try to get to go solar or to get storage. So on the renters and condo side of things, so 37% of Massachusetts housing is rental housing, and then another 10% is multifamily owner occupied. So that is almost half the state, 47%, where the person living there can't just decide to go solar. Landlords have no incentive to do that if the tenant is the one paying the utility bills. So that's where recommendations 8 through 11 come in. We're trying to promote access to solar and its benefits through other avenues. So thinking about expanding community solar budget, investigating plug-in solar as an option for tenants, and then also addressing that split incentive. So we recommend studying multifamily incentive programs and then establishing a direct incentive program for renters and condo owners. This barrier number 5 is on program complexity. So right now, if you want to kind of do everything right, electrify, go solar, get storage, sign up for connected solutions, that is 3 or 4 different enrollment processes. So recommendations number 12 and 13 have an educational resource and like materials focus, making sure that those materials are actually accessible to people. And then recommendation number 14 is based on the success of the CVEO, the Cape and Vineyard Electrification Offering Program, which proved that that bundled approach works, a whole home approach. So we recommend establishing a statewide version of that whole home electrification and backup power program. Interconnection, this is very concrete. I think many people saw the story in Commonwealth Beacon about the home in Bellingham that dealt with a surprise $12,000 charge. So charges like that are killing projects all across the state and the country mid-process, like almost at the point of installation. And so we have a recommendation here to cap fees like that. And in thinking about all of these together in this bucket, the bottom line is that having financial incentive is not ever going to be enough if we don't have processes that really work for the people who are trying to and should be able to go solar and to get storage in Massachusetts. Next slide, please. Trust and outreach. So this theme is about something kind of more fundamental, whether people believe that programs are actually for them. So on the trust side, I mentioned this when I first started, ratepayers might mistrust their utility. And oftentimes there is a very real reason for that. Utilities in Massachusetts themselves have documented high rates, higher than average rates of billing errors, the rates themselves, and then also reports of poor customer service. So in communities that have a history of industrial disinvestment and abuses on the consumer side, there's going to be skepticism of utilities and also of solar developers that runs deep. So even if you have the best program in the world or in the country, if communities are not trusting the institutions whose names are on them and who are delivering those program offerings, then participation is going to stay low. So our recommendation number 15 establishes an outreach and transparency requirement on the utility and developer side so that people know exactly what they're being offered. We have a recycling barrier on here. This came up in an EJ context as a trust issue, where communities that have historically borne the environmental burden of industry being sited next to power plants or waste facilities or other industrial sites are asking when a panel or a battery reaches the end of its useful life, where are they going to go? So we want to make sure that Massachusetts has a local answer to that question to help build trust. On the broadband side, over 100,000 households cannot look up program offerings on the internet. So we recommend bringing information straight to people in their own communities in language that makes sense to them and that they can understand. And then the one thing I also want to mention on this category is that all the other barriers sort of snowball into this one. So a program, for instance, that is more seamless, that doesn't require you to go through as many steps, is going to build greater trust. And having a program that people trust is going to help us build a more robust, strong, clean energy program with greater deployment where we need it the most. So these recommendations really are about sort of earning the right of asking people to participate in programs. Next slide, please. So we covered a lot, 9 barriers and 18 recommendations. So if I can leave you with a sort of like simplified version here, it really is just 3 things. We have to scale the programs that we have and set targets that match what we need from a climate and clean energy perspective, and make sure that that money is reaching the neighborhoods that need it the most with binding and specific goals. We have to remove the barriers to the programs that we have, standardize things, streamline processes. And then lastly, we really need to make sure that we're reaching everyone. And this is about equity and environmental justice. And it's also about fully meeting the potential that we have with behind the meter technology and not losing out on available sites where projects could go and make a big difference in their communities and for our grid. So like I mentioned in the beginning, we really do hope that people take advantage of this report. It is free. We're going to have a link either in the chat or on the final slide. We hope that people read it and share it and use it. And so keep it in mind if there's decisions that are being made in your world, at your agency, in your town that these findings speak to, we would love to have a follow-up conversation with you. And we hope it can be helpful. That's all.
Okay, well, thank you, Elena and Paula, if you could come back on camera, and Tanya also, if you could join us. We have lots of questions already submitted. And I'm going to get to as many of these as I possibly can. So one person comments, in deregulated markets, utilities don't build the generation. Generation build decisions come from independent power producers. That's broadly true. Couple of comments on that. One is that energy storage is not generation, and in Massachusetts, utilities can, in fact, own energy storage. But the other comment is that we're really talking about distributed behind the meter resources in these reports. So yes, we're not saying that utilities should be building things behind the meter. What we're saying is that that behind the meter resources need to be broadly adopted, and we need to have programs and policies that will support that and scale that up quickly, and that they can all be aggregated and dispatched through programs like Connected Solutions to provide benefits to the grid, and the utility would in that case be an off-taker of those benefits, and those benefits would be paid for through the utility, but not that the utility necessarily builds or owns the resources. Okay. What efforts are currently happening to partner and collaborate with advocates and allies from low-income tenant organizations, housing authorities, and redevelopment projects? I will just reiterate that we did have an advisory group that contributed greatly to this second report that represented a number of organizations, but I will pass it over to Elena and Paula to better address this in terms of what efforts are currently happening, I guess, in the advocacy space in Massachusetts, or through any kind of legislation, perhaps, or executive orders to collaborate with advocates and allies.
Do you want me to take that, Paula?
Go ahead and I'll chime in
Yeah.
if anything.
Well, yeah, I think important to emphasize, like Todd said, that we did have a advisory board that worked with us on this report, which was a really important part of structuring the barriers and recommendations, to sort of ground them in like what people's experience has been with their members and in their communities. I will also plug our Clean Energy Equity Coalition, which I mentioned during my part of the presentation, that has pretty good representation from a sort of like diverse group of organizations who have been working on a clean energy equity framework that we want to see codified into state law. So try to make sure that that really does speak to the experience in different sectors, like in housing, in an environmental justice context as well. So that is another area. And then I know that there are like a number, I think Paula could probably speak better to this, that there are a number of different like programs kind of in development with different stakeholder sessions that various state agencies are putting on, with opportunities to plug in there. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Paula.
Well, I think that 2.2 is in the slides that we shared at the beginning. Like the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center is working on a pilot right now. So that's an opportunity for collaboration. The Office of Environmental Justice and Equity also, it's going to be leading efforts around the definition. Like there was a recent executive order from Governor Healy around energy supply. And there are two key components that are relevant to this conversation. One has to do with the definition of benefits, and the other one has to do with community microgrids. So I think that there is another opportunity for collaboration with this specific office. Those are the two at the top of my mind right now. And then there is everything that is happening with the energy affordability bill that is being discussed in the state house. So like if you are not yet plugged in those conversations, I highly recommend you to like get in contact with coalitions like the one that Elena just mentioned, the Clean Energy Equity Coalition, being one of those spaces where better, stronger collaboration could help better inform what the legislature at the end hopefully is going to pass in terms of an energy affordability bill.
Okay, great. Thank you. Samantha, we have somebody requesting to put the contact information slide back up. It was too fast for them, I guess, to make a note of the contact information. Can you put that slide back up, and we can stay on screen. We'll just be smaller. And we'll keep going through the questions, but I want people to have a chance to get that information. Somebody wants to know on the slide that showed the causes of peak demand growth. There was buildings, and then there was transportation, and then there was all others, it said. And they're asking if that includes data centers. I think the answer to that is that it would, but I don't know if there's any actual data center development in Massachusetts, or if there is, I don't think it's a lot.
So it's I can share a little bit on that thought.
Yeah.
I do not think that data centers potential load is reflected in that number, the 24 gigawatts by 2050. First, second, it's hard to tell what is going to happen in terms of data centers deployment or construction in the state. I know that there has been a lot of discussions on this. I know that at the beginning of last year, the queue was like 2 gigawatts for data centers. At the end of last year, it was already in the order of 3 gigawatts queue for data centers. But how much of that is actually going to be built, how much of that is actually going to happen is a whole different question.
Yeah. Yeah, we've done other webinars on load growth in data centers. If you go to Clean Energy Group and look up our webinar archive, you could find that. One of the issues there is that they tend to investigate numerous sites at once, and so they end up in lots of different queues, and it's hard to predict where it's going to end up getting built. I think the takeaway here, though, is that the majority of the increase is from electrification. That's really what we're trying to address. Does hotspots equal heat islands? I don't know if it equals heat islands. It certainly includes heat islands. Does anybody want to define what a hotspot is?
I think
I
that
can
one is great for Tanya. Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah, I
Tanya.
was gonna say I'm happy to define it. So hotspot areas are defined by a pre-existing Massachusetts data layer where hotspot areas are areas where um, the 5% of the service area with the highest land surface temperature index in each Massachusetts regional planning region. So essentially, this is based solely on surface temperatures. So the areas within certain regional planning agencies in Massachusetts that have the highest 5% land surface temperature, where high temperatures are exceeding 70 degrees Fahrenheit, those are considered hotspots. So, as you might expect, most of these areas are surrounding urban areas and where there are like major highways and interstates.
Great, thank you. So probably a lot of overlap with urban heat islands, but not
Yes,
necessarily
for sure.
the same. Okay. Somebody says, I know Paola was just speaking about solar and storage reaching people who are energy burdened, specifically those living in multifamily housing, rental apartments, etc. However, I didn't quite catch how to convert those buildings. Which policy mechanisms help give us this desired result?
Elena, would you want to go first? Or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm scrolling back. So specifically those living in multifamily and rental. Yeah, so these are if Sam, if you want to put these back up, I'm happy to kind of like walk through them again, but those are recommendations. This is the slide that says access and ownership on it. So we have a few recommendations that are specifically to this is recommendations number 8, 9, 10, and 11. So one way would be to sort of just like kind of, we're not always going to be able to overcome that incentive problem. Like not everyone is able to install rooftop solar or residential storage. So we recommend sort of expanding like alternate pathways to solar benefits, and that's community solar and potentially also plug-in solar. Community solar is already a very well-established program in Massachusetts that you can sign up for now, where you can subscribe to a solar project that is located near your home and access solar savings without having to install it yourself. And there's a whole new slew of community solar like program requirements that are going to be rolling out in the coming year. So that's one place also where these recommendations can plug in and they align with a lot of what's going to be happening in Massachusetts. And then we also have recommendations on here that address that like incentive problem. So have a specific incentive program for multifamily buildings to install solar and storage. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And yeah, of course, these recommendations are discussed in much more length in the reports. We don't have time in a 1 hour webinar to really go into all the details on um, each one of these many recommendations. So I really do urge you to look at the reports if you're interested in those details. Okay, I'm not sure I understand this question, so I'm going to throw it out there. And if you understand it, please go ahead and answer it. Have you looked at updating number 16? I don't know, I guess that's recommendation 16, to reflect the proposed CSM fee currently before the DPU.
What is number 16? That's our interconnection. Yeah.
Anyone familiar with the CSM fee currently before the DPU?
We have a raised hand, Todd. I don't know if that's the person who asked that question.
I don't know. I can't see the questions and the participant's hand at the same time. Well, if nobody is sure about that, well, I guess I would ask the person asking the question to type in a little bit more detail on what the CSM fee is, and then we'll try to get to that. Okay. Somebody has just noted that they say we do offer a whole home decarbonization program for homeowners that earn up to 135% of median income that can include solar and storage, and then they give a link. And Elena has just noted that it wasn't referenced in the presentation, but that is outlined in the report introduction and in the appendix. Okay. Are organizations like Habitat for Humanity, Homeowners Rehab, Action for Boston Community Development, or Department of Transitional Assistance part of training opportunities for low-income residents to participate as pilot programs that can provide support and constituent empowerment? Anybody familiar with?
I'm sorry, Todd, can you say again? I didn't follow.
Yeah, so the question is whether organizations such as Habitat for Humanity, Homeowners Rehab, Action for Boston Community Development, or Department of Transitional Assistance are part of training opportunities for low-income residents to participate in pilot programs that can provide support and constituent empowerment.
I think this person is probably asking in the context of the Mass CEC pilot that we referenced. And so I'm not exactly sure which organizations they're in touch with about structuring that, but would encourage the question asker to try to get in touch with them if they have recommendations. And in my experience, the folks there have been very responsive, and I'm happy to try to make a connection if helpful.
Okay, great. Okay, this is another one that people are using a lot of acronyms that I hope somebody understands because I'm not familiar with this. How do you see the new LCEIF legislation impacting or accelerating large-scale clean energy facility construction via EFSB approvals streamlining?
If this is what I think it is about, it's primarily about like they mentioned, large scale resources and less so about those that we would be installing
Yes. Okay.
on homes and such.
Okay.
Um, seems like a
Well,
great
but
advancement. Paula, I think this is
go
something
ahead,
that you
Tanya.
know
Go
a
ahead.
lot about.
No,
I was just going to
go ahead.
say, I think this is the work, the siting work that you know a lot more about than I do. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
so large clean energy infrastructure, F, I don't know what you say for, but thank you, Tanya. Uh, so, and I think that, yeah, to Tanya's point, large clean energy, it's like projects that are more than like 25 megawatts or larger, something along those lines. So DRs are not there. Um, However, there is also a parallel process on the small projects. That's a different conversation. What I do think that where there is an overlap between like thinking about the role of DERs and larger kind of infrastructure investments by utilities is around the electric sector modernization plans. And that's a key place where it's very important to understand how utilities are looking at the role of DERs when they are assessing the infrastructure investments that they will need to do over time.
Great. Yeah, that's a whole topic, and it could be a webinar just by itself. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. It's 3:01, and I apologize we didn't get to all the questions. We did the best we could. I'm just going to thank all the presenters again and everybody who participated, and I'll turn it over to Samantha for any last words.
Thanks. Thanks, Todd. And thank you to all of our panelists and to everyone who joined us today. We'll send you a follow-up email either today or tomorrow with a link to the webinar recording and the slides. And we'll also put links to both part 1 and part 2 of the reports in that follow-up email. And we've got another webinar coming up on June 3rd related to energy storage. This is part of our Beyond Lithium Ion Battery Storage Technologies series. So that one is titled Beyond Lithium Part 2, ESS Tech's Iron Flow Battery. So if that is of interest, we hope you'll join us on June 3rd, and we'll have many more webinars coming up this summer, I am sure. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.